Welcome, everyone. May God bless your day and your entire week as you join us today. We are so glad you're here with us.
Yes, absolutely. Thrilled to be diving into this with you all.
So if you just casually read through chapter 11 of the Gospel of Mark, honestly, it looks like a totally random, almost erratic weekend.
Oh, yeah. It seems chaotic.
Right. Like there's a spontaneous parade, then a literal temper tantrum aimed at a tree, of all things.
Right, a tree.
And then this, chaotic scene of flipping tables in a place of worship.
Right.
But if you look closer, and that's the mission of our deep dive today, using insights from the Holman and NAA Study Bibles, you realize you are watching this highly orchestrated, deeply symbolic, and honestly explosive political drama.
It really is. It's a masterclass in subversion. We're unpacking a really pivotal moment in history here, which is Jesus's arrival in Jerusalem.
Right.
And our goal today is to decode the incredibly dense symbolism behind all of his actions. Because in this narrative, every single prop, a young donkey, a leafy branch, a foreign coin, it is all heavily loaded with meaning.
Yeah. He isn't just, wandering into town to see the sights. He is deliberately setting up a massive confrontation with the religious and political establishment of the day.
Exactly.
But what's so fascinating to me is how he initiates this clash. If he's staging this massive political confrontation, why on earth does he start it by riding into the capital city on a baby donkey?
Right.
That doesn't exactly scream, conquering king.
No, it really doesn't. But to understand the sheer magnitude of the conflict that erupts later in the week, we have to look closely at that specific choice of transportation, because it's a profound statement of intent. The historical context here is crucial. So, Jesus approaches Jerusalem from the Mount of Olives, and before he even enters the city limits, he sends 2 disciples to fetch a very specific animal.
A tied colt, right?
Yes, a tied colt. Specifically, a young donkey that has never been ridden.
And he literally tells them, if anyone asks what you're doing, just say the Lord needs it. Which, that's a pretty bold move, to just requisition someone's livestock. But again, it seems so underwhelming. Like if you're trying to project authority to a city occupied by the Roman Empire, a donkey feels almost comical.
Well, to a modern reader, sure, it might seem humble to the point of being insignificant, but to a first-century Jewish audience, it was an incredibly loud, unmistakable claim.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, Jesus is deliberately acting out a massive ancient prophecy from Zechariah 9:9.
Right.
And that prophecy states that the true king of Israel will come righteous and victorious, yet humble, riding on a donkey. Specifically on a colt, the foal of a donkey. It's the stark, intentional contrast to what the people were used to seeing from their oppressors.
Because, a Roman military conqueror returning from a victorious campaign, they would stage a triumph, right?
Exactly, a massive parade.
They'd enter the city on this terrifying, muscular war horse, surrounded by legions of soldiers, glittering weapons, captured enemies in chains, the whole intimidating spectacle.
Precisely. And Jesus is essentially mocking that paradigm of power. He's contrasting the Roman machinery of war with this symbol of peace. The unbroken colt represents a kingdom that arrives not by the sword, but through humility.
There's also something to be said about the biological reality of an unbroken colt.
Oh, for sure.
Anyone who's spent time around livestock knows you don't just, casually hop onto a young, unridden animal and ride it into a screaming, chaotic crowd.
Without getting violently thrown off, exactly.
Right. The fact that the animal submits to him implies this immediate divine sovereignty over nature itself right from the very start of the parade.
That is a crucial detail. And the crowd, they respond to this highly charged imagery immediately. The text says they start spreading their cloaks and leafy branches on the road.
Like a makeshift red carpet?
Well, more than that. It wasn't just to keep the dust down. Spreading cloaks is a traditional, deeply ingrained royal reception. We see it way back in the Hebrew scriptures, like in 2 Kings 9:13, when Jehu is proclaimed king. So the crowd recognizes the royal claim Jesus is making, and they just lean all the way into it. They start shouting, "Hosanna!"
And Hosanna is one of those words that it's just been completely sterilized by modern usage, I think.
Oh, totally.
We hear it in peaceful church songs today, and we lose the original desperate grit of it. Hosanna is a Hebrew term that literally translates to save now, or save, please.
Yes.
It's a direct quote from Psalm 118, which is part of the Hallel Psalms. And the timing here is everything, right? Because they traditionally sang these psalms during Passover.
The timing is the powder keg here. Passover was the ultimate Jewish festival celebrating their historical liberation from slavery in Egypt.
Right.
So picture the scene. You have a city packed to the brim with millions of pilgrims living under the suffocating thumb of a brutal Roman military occupation.
Just a tense atmosphere.
The atmosphere is absolutely buzzing with this electric expectation of a new liberation. So when they shout, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord," that isn't some polite religious greeting. It is a desperate plea for political deliverance.
But there is this massive, almost tragic tension playing out in this scene. Because the crowd is chanting, "Save us." They're looking at Jesus and projecting their deepest, most urgent desires onto him.
Right.
They expect a powerful political and military liberator who is going to, draw a sword and literally smash the Roman garrison to pieces.
Exactly.
But Jesus is intentionally riding an animal of peace. He has no army, no weapons. I mean, isn't he just setting his own followers up for immediate crushing disappointment?
He is absolutely setting up a shattering of their expectations because the crowd, they want a king strictly on their own terms. They want a leader who fits neatly into their preconceived political boxes. But Jesus is offering a completely different kind of kingdom. One that intends to defeat a much deeper enemy than just the Roman Empire.
Wow.
He's targeting the roots of sin, corruption, and death itself. But the people in that crowd, they can't see it because they're entirely blinded by their immediate political grievances.
Think about the psychological weight of that for a second, especially for you listening right now. Like, how often do we project our own rigid expectations onto leaders, onto institutions, or even, onto our own lives?
Oh, all the time.
We want the shiny war horse to ride in and immediately solve our surface-level problems. And when we're handed a donkey of peace, something that requires patience, humility, deeper internal work, we feel betrayed.
Yeah.
We completely miss the profound message being communicated because we're just too busy staring at our own agenda.
And that underlying tension between expectation and reality, that's exactly what drives the explosion that happens next.
The table flipping.
Right. Because after the parade finishes, Jesus goes into the temple, looks around, and quietly leaves because it's late. But the next morning, the peaceful king becomes startlingly aggressive. The donkey goes back to the stable, and the confrontation begins.
Okay, and this brings us to what might be the most confusing story in the entire gospel, if you don't understand the cultural context.
The fig tree.
The infamous cursing of the fig tree.
Yeah.
And the author of Mark uses a very specific literary device here to explain why Jesus walks into the temple and starts destroying property.
Right. Scholars call this literary device an intercalation, or a sandwich structure. Mark uses this technique quite a bit. He takes one story, splits it in half, and stuffs a second, seemingly unrelated story right in the middle.
Like meat in the sandwich.
Exactly. The goal is for the two stories to interpret each other. The outer layers of the sandwich provide the meaning for the meat in the middle.
Okay, so let's look at the bread of the sandwich first. It's the morning after the parade. Jesus and the disciples are walking from the village of Bethany back into Jerusalem.
Yeah.
Jesus is hungry. He sees a leafy fig tree in the distance.
Right.
He walks up to it, finds absolutely no fruit on it, and proceeds to curse the tree out loud, saying, "May no one ever eat fruit from you again."
Why?
Now, here is the kicker for me. The text literally states it was not the season for figs.
Yes, it does.
So, why on earth is he doing this? If I go to an apple orchard in the dead of winter, I don't start screaming at the trees for not having apples. It seems completely irrational.
It does seem irrational, sure, if we treat it merely as an agricultural event. But we have to understand the specific botany of fig trees in first-century Palestine combined with the language of the Old Testament prophets.
Okay, break that down for us.
Well, prophets like Jeremiah and Hosea, they frequently use the fig tree as a metaphor for Israel and its religious establishment. But the biological mechanism of the tree is the real key to the whole scene.
Because of the leaves.
Exactly. In the life cycle of these specific fig trees, before the main harvest of ripe figs ever appears, the tree produces these early, small, edible green buds. They're often called pash.
Okay.
Crucially, these early buds appear alongside the leaves. Therefore, if a fig tree has a full canopy of leaves, it is biologically advertising that it at least has these early buds to eat.
Ah, I see.
But this particular tree had the appearance of life from a distance, but upon closer inspection, it was entirely barren. It was engaging in false advertising.
So Jesus isn't just like angry at a tree for obeying the seasons. He is enacting a living, breathing parable.
Exactly.
He's using the tree to pronounce a prophetic judgment on spiritual hypocrisy, putting on a great show of life while producing zero actual sustenance.
And we know this with absolute certainty because of the meat in the middle of Mark's sandwich.
Right.
Immediately after cursing the tree for its false advertising, Jesus walks straight into the temple complex in Jerusalem.
And this is where the historical text reads like an action movie.
Yeah.
I mean, he enters the temple, specifically the massive outer courtyard, and starts physically driving out the people who are buying and selling.
Yeah.
He overturns the heavy tables of the money changers. He smashes the benches of those selling pigeons. He even acts as a physical blockade, stopping anyone from carrying merchandise through the temple courtyards as a shortcut.
It's intense.
It is a total aggressive disruption of the central religious economy.
And to grasp the shockwave this would have caused, we really need to look at the economic reality detailed in the historical sources. The temple wasn't just a place of quiet reflection. It was an enormous, sprawling complex recently renovated by Herod the Great.
Right.
During Passover, it was the economic center of the Jewish world. Pilgrims traveled hundreds, sometimes thousands of miles to get there. Now, to pay the mandatory annual temple tax, you couldn't use standard Roman or Greek coins.
Because those Roman coins had the face of the emperor stamped on them.
Right.
Usually with an inscription claiming the emperor was a god.
Exactly.
So bringing that into the temple was blatant idolatry.
Right. So the religious authorities set up a system where pilgrims had to exchange their dirty Roman money for accepted currency. Specifically, Tyrian shekels, which were favored for their high silver content.
Okay.
You also needed to buy unblemished animals for sacrifice. The pigeons, specifically, were the sacrifice mandated in the book of Leviticus for the absolute poorest people who couldn't afford to buy a lamb. And the religious elite, overseen by the high priest, had set up a highly lucrative monopoly right inside the temple grounds to provide these exchange and merchant services.
Okay, let me pause and play devil's advocate for a second here.
Sure.
The pilgrims needed acceptable coins, and they needed unblemished sacrifices. If the money changers were providing a necessary logistical service for people who had travels across the known world, why does Jesus react with such intense fury?
That's a great question.
Because I look at this and I see the ancient equivalent of a modern megacorporation. You know, sometimes a company starts with a genuinely noble mission to help people. But over decades, the bureaucracy, the logistics, the obsession with profit margins, it completely swallows the original intent.
Yes, absolutely.
The organizational structure becomes more important than the soul of the mission. But Jesus isn't just offering a critique of unchecked capitalism here, is he?
No, his anger is really rooted in where this commerce was taking place and who was being collateral damage. This entire bustling, noisy marketplace was set up in the court of the Gentiles. See, the temple was divided into strict zones of access. This massive outer courtyard was the one and only place where non-Jews people from other nations who were seeking the God of Israel were permitted to come and pray.
Wow. Okay. That changes the entire perspective.
Doesn't it?
Yeah. By setting up a loud, chaotic financial market in that specific courtyard, the religious leaders had effectively built a wall of noise and commerce. They were basically telling the rest of the world, your access to God doesn't matter to us. Our religious convenience and our profit margins are far more important than your space to pray.
It was the ultimate exclusion. And that is exactly why Jesus quotes two specific Old Testament prophets at the top of his lungs while he's turning over tables.
Right.
He yells a quote from Isaiah 56:7 saying, "Is it not written, my house will be called a house of prayer for all nations?" Notice the emphasis on all nations.
Yeah.
And then he drops the hammer by blending it with Jeremiah 7:11, shouting, "But you have made it a den of robbers."
And den of robbers doesn't mean the place where thieves actually commit their crimes. The den is the safe house. It's the cave they retreat to so they can hide from justice after they've robbed people out on the road.
It is a staggering indictment. Jesus is declaring that the temple system has become a hideout for corrupt, exploitative leaders. They perform elaborate religious rituals to feel safe from God's judgment while entirely missing the heart of God regarding justice and mercy for the vulnerable.
Which brings us perfectly back to the fig tree.
Yes.
The sandwich is complete. The temple is the fig tree. I mean, from a distance, it has all the magnificent leaves of religious activity, the massive choirs, the smoke of sacrifices, the stunning Herodian architecture, the bustling crowds of pilgrims.
It looks incredibly alive.
Right. But when Jesus gets up close to examine it, there is absolutely zero fruit of justice, mercy, or true worship. It is a spiritually barren machine. And just as the fig tree was cursed to wither, Jesus is acting out the impending destruction of this entire corrupt temple system.
And you can't just shut down the economic engine of the capital city and expect the elite to simply shrug it off. Once Jesus hits them in their wallets and publicly shames their operation, they have no choice but to confront him. They have to regain control. And that brings us to the Sanhedrin.
Yes, the authorities strike back. The text notes that the religious leaders, specifically the chief priests, the scribes, and the elders, march up to Jesus. Together, these groups make up the Sanhedrin, which was the 70-member supreme governing body of the Jewish people.
The pinnacle of power.
Exactly. This is the absolute peak of institutional, theological, and political power. They corner Jesus as he is walking in the temple courts and demand, "By what authority are you doing these things? And who gave you this authority?"
It is an incredibly calculated trap. The Greek word they use for authority is exousia, which refers to rightful jurisdiction or official delegated power.
Okay.
If Jesus openly claims, "God gave me this authority," they have the witnesses they need to immediately arrest him for blasphemy and shut him down.
Oh.
But Jesus is intimately familiar with rabbinic debate tactics. Instead of answering their trap directly, he counters with a question of his own.
He puts the Supreme Court on the witness stand.
Exactly.
He says, "I will ask you one question. Answer me, and I will tell you by what authority I do these things." John's baptism, was it from heaven or of human origin? Tell me.
Wait, so by asking about John the Baptist, he is essentially trapping them in their own political polling data.
Yes.
They can't answer without completely alienating someone.
He creates an airtight, impossible dilemma.
Hmm?
The text gives us this brilliant behind-the-scenes look at the Sanhedrin huddling together, frantically whispering and calculating the political fallout.
Right.
If they admit John's authority was from heaven, the logical trap snaps shut. Jesus will simply say, "Then why didn't you believe him?" Because John the Baptist had explicitly pointed to Jesus as the chosen one. To validate John is to validate Jesus.
Oh, wow. But if they say John's ministry was strictly from men, meaning John was just some, unauthorized fanatic in the distance.
They risk a massive public uprising.
Yeah. The crowds in Jerusalem deeply revered John as a true, authentic prophet of God. If these wealthy, elite leaders publicly denounce a beloved populist prophet, the people might literally riot. And a riot would bring the Roman legions down on them, destroying their delicate political power.
So they take the ultimate coward's way out. The theological Supreme Court of the nation looks at Jesus and feigns ignorance. They literally say, "We don't know."
Yeah.
And Jesus calmly replies, "Neither will I tell you by what authority I'm doing these things." It's brilliant. By refusing to rule on John, they completely disqualify themselves from having the moral authority to question Jesus.
Exactly.
He exposes the fact that their power isn't based on a pursuit of truth at all. It's entirely based on preserving their own status.
They are completely consumed by institutional survival. Because their question was entirely insincere, Jesus refuses to validate their corrupt court by entering a plea. So, after outmaneuvering the most powerful men in the country, Jesus leaves the chaotic Temple Mount. He retreats back to his disciples. And this is where we see the final piece of the puzzle regarding what true authority actually looks like.
And this happens the next morning. The disciples are walking past that same fig tree Jesus had cursed the day before. Peter stops in his tracks and notices that the massive tree is completely withered, right down to the roots.
Yeah.
It's a shocking, visceral demonstration of power. Peter exclaims, "Rabbi, look, the fig tree you cursed has withered." And Jesus uses this dead tree as the backdrop for a vital lesson on faith.
Jesus replies simply, "Have faith in God." He tells them that whoever tells this mountain to be thrown into the sea and does not doubt in their heart but believes that what they say will happen, it will be done for them.
Okay, let's pause on that verse, because it is one of the most frequently misunderstood passages in history.
Oh, without a doubt.
It has been used so often to promise people that if they just, muster up enough psychological belief, they'll get a new car or a promotion or whatever personal ambition they want. It gets treated like a cosmic vending machine.
Right, but that interpretation strips the text of all its historical and literary context. When we look at the rabbinic literature from that era, the mountain was a very well-known idiom.
Okay.
It was used as a metaphor for seemingly impossible obstacles or insurmountable difficulties. In fact, a great scholar or teacher who could solve incredibly complex problems was sometimes referred to honorably as an uprooter of mountains. Yeah.
So Jesus isn't handing them a blank check for their personal wish list. He's using a common cultural idiom to talk about overcoming massive spiritual and systemic obstacles.
Precisely. Remember what he just did? He just completely dismantled the theological legitimacy of the temple system, the literal mountain of religious bureaucracy that was standing right in front of them in Jerusalem.
Right.
He's teaching his disciples that true power doesn't come from sitting on a massive institutional throne. True power comes from a life that is completely, radically dependent on the sovereign will of God through faithful prayer.
But he doesn't stop there. He attaches a massive, non-negotiable condition to this power. And honestly, it is the hardest part of the entire chapter to digest.
It really is.
Right after talking about moving mountains, Jesus says, "And when you stand praying, if you hold anything against anyone, forgive them, so that your Father in heaven may forgive you your sins." He inextricably links the supernatural power of faith to the gritty, daily practice of radical forgiveness.
It acts as the ultimate safeguard against authority becoming corrupt. Think about the religious leaders in the temple.
Yeah.
They were using their religious authority to exploit vulnerable people and protect their own status.
Yeah.
Jesus is telling his followers that in his kingdom, your spiritual authority is completely voided if your heart is full of bitterness. You cannot possibly claim to be connected to the life-giving power of God if you are actively withholding grace from your neighbor.
It functions almost like a plumbing valve.
Yeah,
know.
I like that.
You cannot expect the high pressure of God's power or the fresh water of his forgiveness to flow freely into your life if you've completely clamped the pipe shut by holding onto a grudge against someone else.
Exactly.
The entire system only works if the water's allowed to flow through you. The moment you close off the pipe toward your neighbor, you instantly shut off the source to yourself.
That analogy perfectly captures the mechanics of what Jesus is teaching. Think about the two symbols we've explored today.
The tree and the temple.
Yes. The barren fig tree had no fruit to offer a hungry traveler. The corrupt temple system had no space to offer a seeking outsider. Both represented closed, self-serving systems that had completely blocked the flow of God's grace.
Right.
Jesus is building a new community, one marked by a radical dependence on God to move impossible obstacles, and an equally radical commitment to continuously forgive others.
Man, what a profound journey we've just taken through a single chapter of text. Let's quickly trace the through line of what we've unpacked here.
Let's do it.
We watched Jesus deliberately arrive in Jerusalem as a peaceful but profoundly disruptive king, shattering the crowd's violent expectations by choosing a donkey over a war horse.
Right.
We saw him enact a living parable with the barren fig tree to pronounce judgment on the performative, exclusive religion of the temple complex.
Yes.
We watched him completely outmaneuver the highest theological authorities in the nation, exposing their deep cowardice. And finally, we saw him teach his followers that true, mountain-moving power doesn't come from institutional status, but from genuine faith and a heart willing to forgive.
It is a total paradigm shift. It completely redefines what power and authority look like. It strips away the obsession with dominance and replaces it with a demand for authentic internal fruitfulness.
And that brings us to a final thought for you to mull over as you step back into your own life this week. We want to leave you with a question directly tied to the central metaphor of everything we've discussed today. Think about your own routines, your career, your relationships, your personal beliefs. How much of your daily energy is entirely spent cultivating leaves?
Wow.
You know what I mean? Looking good on the outside, appearing successful, saying the right things in the right circles, projecting an image that you have it all completely together.
Yeah.
Are you spending all your time manicuring those leaves while completely neglecting the quiet, incredibly hard internal work of growing the actual fruit of substance, character, and genuine love? If someone sees you from a distance, you might look like a flourishing tree. But if they actually get close to you, if they're hungry for grace or truth, if they're really hungry for grace or truth, is there any real nourishment to be found?
That's the real question.
Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into Mark 11. It's been an absolute privilege to explore this history with you. May God bless all of you. We will catch you next time.